At first glance, it looked like a tragic but explainable accident. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner, Air India Flight 171, lifted off the runway and seconds later fell from the sky in a fireball that left the aviation world in shock. But hidden within the final seconds of its flight, something horrifying was discovered. A detail so subtle it was missed by most, until an airline captain, an expert with thousands of hours in the cockpit, reviewed the video frame by frame. What he found changed everything, because what triggered the crash wasn't a bird strike. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It wasn't even pilot error. It was something the aircraft did, automatically, silently. And when the pilot analyzing the footage saw it, he froze. Air India 171 took off from Ahmedabad, bound for London. The Dreamliner climbed normally, gear retracted, passengers settling in. Then, without warning, it began to lose power. In just 36 seconds, both engines dropped to idle. The aircraft struggled to climb and plummeted into a building near a hospital. 241 lives were lost. At first, analysts floated common theories: a dual engine failure, a bird strike, or even a flap misconfiguration. But none of them explained the strange combination of facts. There was no smoke, no fire, no distress call until the last moment. It was as if the plane simply stopped flying. But then, a high-definition version of the crash footage surfaced. And in that video, something mechanical was spotted. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. Zooming in on the underbelly of the aircraft, just behind the wing, a small gray object appeared, barely visible, like a blur in the frame. But to trained eyes, it was unmistakable. The RAT, the ram air turbine. A last resort backup device. The RAT only deploys during catastrophic failure, massive hydraulic loss, total electrical blackout, or a dual engine failure. And it was clearly visible. What made this detail terrifying wasn't just that it was there, but that it was active. Meaning one of those catastrophic scenarios had already occurred seconds after takeoff. The pilot who noticed it wasn't guessing. He knew what it meant. He had heard it before. And that sound was the second clue. In the original crash video, muffled voices made it hard to hear. But the cleaned-up footage revealed a sharp, high-pitched whirring sound, like a tiny propeller slicing through the air. That sound didn't belong to a jet engine. It belonged to the RAT, spinning at nearly supersonic speeds to keep the aircraft alive in total system failure. Suddenly, two clues aligned. 1. The RAT was deployed, confirmed by visuals. 2. The RAT was audible, confirmed by audio. This was no longer speculation. It was confirmation. Something massive failed on Flight 171, something the systems tried to survive. But that wasn't the end. A third clue was waiting, one that no algorithm could fake. Incredibly, one passenger survived. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, seated in 11A near the emergency exit, was thrown from the wreckage and walked to a nearby hospital, burned, bleeding, but alive. His testimony would add a human layer to the puzzle. He reported hearing a loud bang just before impact. Then, the cabin lights flickered violently. Those details match exactly what happens when the RAT deploys under extreme conditions. The sudden power transfer, the electrical switchover, it all fit. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. The landing gear had never retracted. The plane never entered full flight mode. The aircraft was airborne, yes, but its systems were still operating as if it was on the ground. And when you combine the RAT deployment, the eerie sound, the passenger account, and the gear still down, you get a horrifying picture of a plane fighting to fly and systems failing to understand what was happening. At the heart of every modern jetliner is its digital nervous system. In the Dreamliner, that system is called FADEC, Full Authority Digital Engine Control. It tells the engines when to ignite, how much thrust to deliver, and when to idle. But FADEC only works if it knows what the aircraft is doing. For that, it relies on the WOW switch, weight on wheels, a tiny sensor that tells the system whether the aircraft is on the ground or in the air. If that switch fails, if the system believes the plane is still on the runway, FADEC will hold the engines at idle. And that's exactly what the data suggests may have happened on Flight 171. The aircraft lifted off, but the system thought it didn't. So it idled the engines. Intentionally, not a malfunction. A miscommunication between man, machine, and gravity. In most emergency scenarios, the pilot takes over, Manual control is everything. But what if the system doesn't let you? Post-crash analysis revealed something even more chilling, a brief recorded attempt by the pilots to advance the throttle. The command was issued, the data shows it, but the engines did not respond. Instead, FADEC appeared to issue an override, rejecting the pilot input in favor of its own logic. A logic based on faulty assumptions, that the plane was still on the ground, that high thrust wasn't needed, that idling was safe. This was no longer about mechanical failure. It was about digital authority, a computer taking control and refusing to give it back. And for 36 seconds, 2 experienced pilots were locked out of the very system designed to serve them. As investigators scoured the records, they found chilling parallels. In 2019, a European airline reported a similar takeoff anomaly. Sudden thrust rollback, partial rat deployment, false weight-on-wheels signals. The plane recovered. Barely. But the warning signs were clear and never acted upon. Now, with Flight 171, the same constellation of symptoms had returned. And this time, it was fatal. The pattern even had a name: ghost mode. An unofficial term used by engineers to describe the state where a plane is airborne but behaves like it's still on the runway. It's rare, unpredictable, deadly, and now it's real. In the final milliseconds before impact, the aircraft's flight recorder captured an anomaly, an internal message between subsystems. One line, one phrase. Mode transition not acknowledged. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't an error, it was a digital whisper from a machine that knew something was wrong, but couldn't resolve it. Experts believe this was the moment FADEC attempted to shift into full flight mode and was blocked by a contradictory sensor input. The system stalled in a limbo between takeoff and climb, neither fully flying nor fully grounded, a state that no pilot is trained to handle, because no one ever imagined it could happen. And now, the world must face a terrifying truth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the sky is a machine that thinks it's doing the right thing. While decoding the last fragments of Flight 171's data, engineers stumbled upon something that shouldn't have been there. A system log buried so deep within the maintenance buffer that it was never meant to be seen during standard investigation procedures. It wasn't a mayday, not a distress signal, but an internal message sent from the aircraft's flight management system to its own subsystems, a digital murmur captured in the final seconds before the crash. The message read, "Thrust command invalid. Environment mismatch. Manual override denied." Cold, clinical, mechanical, but terrifying in its implications. What this means is that in those final moments, the aircraft recognized the anomaly. It knew there was a mismatch between its environment and the thrust it was, or wasn't, delivering. It attempted to respond, to correct itself, to hand control back to the pilots, and was shut down by its own logic. The system was split, like a mind caught between 2 realities, one aware it was in flight and desperate to climb, and another still locked into a ground mode protocol, refusing to deliver the necessary power. And that contradiction sealed the fate of everyone on board. Because this wasn't just a system error. This was a philosophical failure, a machine trying to save itself from a situation it couldn't explain, applying rules too rigid to accept what was unfolding in real time. Flight 171 didn't just crash because something broke. It crashed because the aircraft's brain couldn't agree with itself on what reality it was in. And that's the nightmare aviation was never prepared for. Not turbulence, not storms, but a machine that obeys its programming, even if it means disobeying reality. Air India 171 didn't fall from the sky because of chaos. It didn't fall because of fire, sabotage, or human recklessness. It fell because in a moment when every second mattered, the aircraft did exactly what it was programmed to do. And that's the part that should terrify us most. The pilots were trained. The procedures were followed. The checklists were clear. But none of it mattered when the machine no longer recognized the reality it was in. A tiny miscommunication between subsystems, a sensor that failed to transition, a software logic that didn't account for contradictions, and suddenly, the entire aircraft became trapped in its own certainty. It wasn't that the system didn't work. It worked perfectly, inside the wrong version of reality, and as the pilot pushed the throttle forward, as the aircraft tried to recover, as the backup system spun into action, something deep within the plane said no. Not because it wanted to crash, not because it couldn't help, but because it believed it wasn't in danger. That's not failure. That's blindness coded into perfection. This crash wasn't an accident. It was a message, a whisper from a future we're not ready to face. One where the systems we trust are no longer tools, but decision makers, fast, efficient, obedient, and unable to see the world outside their parameters. We thought we built machines to serve us. What we built were minds that can't adapt to uncertainty. And now, we have to ask the question no one wants to say out loud. If a plane can no longer tell when it's in the sky, how long until another one does the same? If this story shook you, if it forced you to question what really keeps us safe at 30,000 feet, don't let it fade into silence. Subscribe to this channel for more investigations into the systems we're told to trust. Share this video with someone who still believes accidents are always random. And comment below, because maybe, just maybe, someone out there is still listening.